Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Chala, Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph. We are learning today Daf Chaf Hey. We are on Daf Chaf Hey, 2 lines from the top of the Amid in the middle of the Mishnah. First part of the Mishnah, the way we learned is that the Mishnah is describing the Gemar Malacha when it comes to making of a dough, similar to that which we learned in many Masechtas, Trumas U'Maisres, that only after produce reaches its Gemar Malacha may one midrabanan not even consume achilas aray prior to the Gemar Malacha, even though one should not have achilas keva, but one may have achilas aray. When it comes to dough, the Mishnah described the difference between a dough made out of wheat flour, where the Gemar Malacha is its complete mixing. It has to be fully kneaded. That's what the Mishnah says. When it comes to flour made out of barley, where the flour and the water does not fully blend, so there is a stage after one kneads it a bit where one packs it, as we described. And by the way, the packing happens quicker because you're not kneading. You knead a little bit and then you pack it down. But that is its Gemar Malacha, which the Mishnah says that after that one may not even eat achilas aray. That's the first part of the Mishnah. And today we're going to learn the second part of the Mishnah, which is the Mishnah identifying an earlier point in which, even though the dough is not yet in its Gemar Malacha state, if you want to separate challah, you may. Don't forget, we learned last week that if someone separates challah from flour, it's meaningless. Gezel beyad hakohen. Even though the Gemar Malacha, let's say by wheat, is when it's fully kneaded, what we'll see, if one separated challah earlier, then that challah is a proper challah separation. There's a lot of nuance to that. Now, I do want to say that I thought we'll have a discussion here in the Gemara, which we don't, as to what is the definition of achilas aray, achilas keva. The Gemara does not discuss it here, but it's implied through the topic that we'll have in the Gemara. But I want to go back to what we learned, whether it was in Trumas or Maisres. Really, it's correct to simplify and to say that there is a machlokes rishonim. Some are of the opinion that the definition, what is called casual consumption versus a proper meal, quantity, that is an approach of some rishonim. And just for the record, it's the amount of a beitza or more. Al derech the din of tumas echolin. So it's not about what quantity, the concept of kamus, that when you eat a certain amount, that's called achilas keva. For people that count calories, that's how it works. I don't care how you're eating it, sitting, standing, you ate the amount. And other rishonim say it's not about the quantity, it's the manner in which you ate it. It was your way of eating it. Mamish, the way many people, they can eat 20 sandwiches standing beregalachas. It's called casual consumption because they didn't sit down like a mensch and take a plate and take a fork and take a knife. It's the way one eats it. This is a very significant machlokes. It goes all the way down in halacha. We're going to learn today's daf following, underlying the opinion that achilas aray versus achilas keva has to do with quantity. That will make our sugya a lot easier to understand. So we're beginning with the second half of the Mishnah. But then the Gemara will go back to the first din of the Mishnah, casual versus formal. And the Gemara is going to bring down a shita of Rabbi Yosi. If I understand correctly, it's an Amoira who cannot argue with the Mishnah. But what Rabbi Yosi says externally and what he means to say are not the same. Rabbi Yosi says that unfinished dough, right? The Mishnah seems to be saying you can have achilas aray. Rabbi Yosi says you can have achilas keva. The way we will learn pshat in Rabbi Yosi is you can have as much as you want. Normally, quantity, you ate a kibetzo, that's called the formal. No, Rabbi Yosi holds that there are certain items like dough that because of it being dough, I don't care how much you eat. The fact that it's dough, the fact that after you will eat, if there's leftovers, you're going to put it back in the dough. That makes whatever you do with it defined halachically as something casual, something araidik, and not something permanent or formal. That will be a very important piece of today's daf. Another piece of the Gemara will be our Mishnah only speaks about wheat versus barley, kneading versus packing. What about the other 3 types of flour, spelt, rye, and oats? The Mishnah does not speak about what is its Gemar Malacha. The Gemara is going to address it. And finally, on Daf Chafei Amud Beis, we're going to have various braises. These are works of Tanoim that the Gemara will bring, that either will hold that the Gemar Malacha of a dough is in an earlier stage of the Mishnah's Gemar Malacha. Let's go to wheat. They won't hold it has to be thoroughly kneaded. So that's going to be a chumrah, because they hold that even when you only reach the earlier stage, it's already called tevel, and you can't even have aray. And in Eretz Yisrael, it's called tevel, misa b'dei shamayim, it's a chumrah. And other brises that say something very lenient, that they hold that the gemar malacha is at a later stage, taka l'kula. No one is advocating for people not to take challah. The part is that if you had a casual consumption, even after it was fully needed, according to some Tanoim, you're not going to be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. So we're going to have brises both on one side or on the other side arguing with the Mishnah. That's a synopsis of today's daf. I would like to dedicate today's daf to Ilu Nishmas, my dear father, Rav Mordechai ben Rav Simcha Yitzchak, who instilled in all of his children a love to learning, and to which, amongst many other things, I'm deeply grateful to God for having him as my father. Okay, so Chavre Daf Chafei, 2 lines from the top. I know it sounds like in the middle, but we're not in the middle. So after the Mishnah defined the Gemar Malacha cut-off point, after which you may not even have casual consumption with the dough prior to taking challah. Now I have another kasha. Let me go in the other direction. Whoever here made dough, when you put the water in the flour, you have to make an effort to mix all the flour in the water. What were to happen if you begin to knead the dough, you begin to be megalgel the dough, that's the words in Chazal, but in your bowl, some of it is still mamish flour. Don't forget, flour, you cannot take challah off from the flour. Question the Mishnah will have is, if a person took off challah at this earlier stage, is the challah separation valid? The Mishnah will say yes. The way we'll learn the Mishnah. It's not only valid for the kneaded part. Since it's in the bowl, if I separate challah prior to my chiyuv, but I did it, it's effective for all of what's in the bowl, even for the flour that wasn't yet part of the dough. Okay, so let's read it inside. Kivin shehid noisena sasamayim. Once you have a keli, and by the way, it's not a flatware, it's a keli, it's a receptacle, right? Because you put water in it. After dough is dough, it's not going to roll off your plate. But here you have a keli, which is a significant halachically, because a keli also in other areas of halacha combines everything that's in it. That's the logic behind it. So everything is in a bowl. You put water. So the Mishnah says, magbas chalasa. Magbas chalasa is b'di'evid. If you separated the challah, what you did is effective. And what's the chiddush? It's even effective for the flour that wasn't yet mixed. Why? Because it's going to be mixed, and it's in the bowl when you remove the challah. If I would have taken it from the flour that's garnished, I'm taking it from the dough. But the Mishnah gives one caveat. Ubelvad, providing that if in your keli you have some dry flour that is still unmixed, if the quantity of that unmixed flour is so much that it itself has the minimum ashir, that if you would only make a dough from it, you would be chayiv to separate challah, the 5 quarters, the 5 revayim. Here, halachically, even though it's in a keli, we view that flour as a distinct entity. Ubemela, the challah that you took from the dough is ineffective to be matir the unmixed flour. Gavaldik. Mishnah. It's like learning Shulchan Aruch, Chatzam Achayis. So everything is simple until when the Gemara shows you that simple is not simple. Okay. How much challah you take, Mr. Rabbi? Just for Rabbi Blana, how much challah do you take? Midrabanan, we learned last week, 1/24. So let me add these words. So this person, not knowing this halacha, he or she cheshbent a 24th from everything in the keli, doesn't help. And just for the record, 1/24 is the minimum. So forget about this whole scenario. It means in the times of Chazal, when they had the minimum share, like Peah, we learned, Midrabanan, a 60th. Many people separated more than a 60th. Okay, Truma, even the generous 1 of 40. But if someone goes and says, I'm going to separate more in one go, it's a bona fide separation of Truma. So the same thing with Challah, even though the person from their ignorance thought they're being mafresh for everything. They gave Taka 24th. But now the Mishnah is saying, it was not effective for the Kemach. So this guy is going to say, if I would have known that, I would have given less. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. You were quite ashamed, and it was effective. It was what you separated is Challah. What was it matir? Only the dough. In other words, a lesser amount of dough becomes batel. Once the dough, what makes something chashuv? If you can do a mitzvah with it. Mitzvah gives something the real chashivus. Okay. That's the end of the Mishnah, and let's begin with the Gemara. Says the Gemara again, that until when you reach the Gemar Malacha by the dough, you can have what we will call casual consumption. Again, let's go with the Mahalach. You can snack less than a kibetza amount. That's defined by the small amount as achilas aray, which implies, now we're going to have again a machlokes amiroyim, Rab Chagai, Rabbi Yosi. We quoted Rabbi Yosi in the intro. We didn't quote Rab Chagai, but Rab Chagai learns pshat the way we learned the Mishnah. That Amar Rab Chagai and Achanami, Lo Shanu, what are you allowed to have? Because you didn't yet have the Gemar Malacha, the dough is not fully needed. You can have what halacha will call achilas aray. Aval keva. But can you have a proper formal consumption? Let's go with quantity. Can you eat a larger amount? That's what the Mishnah implies. Only aray, not keva. Why? So the Rab Chagai gives a reason. The question, now let's go see how the Marafulda understands this liner. There's so many ways of learning it, but we're going to go with one. You see, it's like a middle of the narrow column in the beginning of the Gemara Marafulda. How are you being marim? How are you getting out of your challah obligation? Lechol mimenu harbe kedei sheloi tishor shir challah v'tipater. No, it's be'emes. Rab Chagai is saying even our Mishnah holds you can eat. Let's go with quantity. Eat as much as you want. I already want to give words. When I learned this yesterday, I was thinking, why would he say that? Because on Trumas and Maasros, we learned you can't have keva, you can have aray. Everyone will hold that dough, no matter how much you have, that eating is always called aray. That's the way we learn pshat. So the kasha is, so that begs the question, so why only aray, not keva? If it means eat as much as you want. Let me add another halachic nuance. I'm going to say already by heart what Rabbi Yosi says. We had this in Masechtas Maasros or Trumas. When the Mishnah spoke about the Gemar Malach of wine, if you remember, for the winemakers. So even after the wine is squeezed and it goes into the gas and it goes through the pipe and it falls on the bottom, it sits. As it sits, naturally, there is the separation of the wine proper and the shumarim and the seeds and the skins. And the way we learned the Mishnah, even though I'm wondering, for those of us who learned, I think it was Chitas, the Alter Rebbe and Tanya writes the opposite, the Stam Lahoyer. But the way we learned the Mishnah, it rises to the top. That's the Metzias. And at some point, people skim the top of this reservoir. They remove what would make the wine inferior. You don't want to drink wine and have seeds in your mouth. Now you have Gemar Malach. That's rule number one. Then the question is, there were times that a person is having a su'udah and they need wine, and they have in their home, they have this wine press. They take a jug, they put it into the wine press, they fill it up with wine before they skimmed, and they put it on their table. Now, in other cases, the rule would be, since you are having it the way it is, that means for you, it's a finished product. Oy bazoy, you're chayv to be a toidim u'ma'aser. So we learned over there that you don't have to be toidim u'ma'aser. Why? Because even though, out of necessity, you took the wine and you put it on the table, it's already in a pitcher. It's not in a barrel. It's not in the other. It's on the table. Since you did not skim the shemarim off the wine, you have it in your mind that if anything in this loig will remain, I'm not putting it in my fridge. I'm putting it back in the gas. I'm putting it back. So there's a rule that when you take something premature, even though right now you plan to eat it, your intent of if there'll be leftovers. If everything finishes, everything finished. You're going to put it back. That is a siman that you don't view this as real, bona fide Gemar Malachet wine or Gemar Malachet wine over there. And we're going to go to the same thing with the dough. Dough is something that even if people eat it, we all ate dough. I ate dough. I hope I made that right bracha. It's not. Says nish. And if you get sick in middle, you're going to put it back in the dough. Why would you not? So that, let me go with that mahalach. That halachically will say that whatever you're eating, no matter how much, it's not Gemar Malachet. So why would you not be able to have what otherwise would be called keva, since halachically it's not called keva? So that's the meaning of Rab Chagi that Rav Fulda is saying, is because then people, it sounds like, even today, a bag of flour is 5 pounds in the market. That means if you begin to nash off the dough prior to the full kneading, you won't have the minimum share. In other words, Chazal did not want for you to allow yourself, let me eat, and with no limitations, because you're going to end up circumventing the mitzvah of challah. And that's what we learned last week. Even when there is tumah, there was a machlekes tanoim whether you should make small doughs or not. We have a value of not getting out of the obligation, even though you could. Right? Don't wear a beged of dalat kamfos and don't wear tzitzis. You could get out of it. We're not looking to get out. We're dafka looking to get in. So that's the meaning of Rab Chagai. No, it's really keva would have been muter because halachically it's never keva. But mipnei shumarim lepatram enachala, because if we will allow people to freely eat dough, then too many people will get out of their obligation of removing the challah. And Rabbi Yossi argues with that. The way the Maraf Fulda learns, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Chagi both accept the premise, and that is that, again, let's go with aray keva is quantity. Normally, here, no matter how much you eat, it's always called halachically aray. So therefore, when the Mishnah says that you can have aray before the Gemar Malacha, says Rabbi Yossi, no, you can have as much as you want. In min hadam, leis shama min aklum, when you read the Mishnah, there is no implied halacha from Rabbeinu HaKadosh that only aray you can eat and not keva. No, don't have that implication. You're wrong with that. Sha'afilu shuhu noitel mimeno shtayim shalosh mikratzois, even if you're going to take 2 or 3 mikratzois, means large pieces, I'm going with quantity. Each one of these pieces normally would be defined as keva. Let's go with it's about a kamus. It halachically won't be called achilas keva, because if you will have leftovers from the dough, you will not throw it out. That's not the way it works. You're going to eat it. The moment you don't want to eat it, you're going to put it back in the dough. And this is like we learned to Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Zeira. B'shem Rabbi Lazar, this is what we quoted, the din of the wine that was put into a jug. That will always be defined as wine that's not yet nigmar malachtoi, af mashabelogin, even that which is already in a flask, which is on your dining room table, is not going to be considered tevel. Why? Because people plan. That's a mesechtas meiseres. If there'll be anything left over, they're going to put it back. Oy bazoi, taking dough, no matter how big the piece is, will halachically never be called achilas keva. So again, we have a machlokes between Rab Chagai and Rab Yossi. The Mishnah does use the words oichlin aray. So Rab Chagai has a diuk. Yeah, oichlin aray and not keva. Rab Chagai knows Rab Yossi's logic. Halachically, it's not called keva. Doesn't matter. You're going to get away. You're not going to separate challah. It sounds like many people nash dough. And it also sounds like that the doughs were just a bit more than the minimum, So if you're going to have a little bite, you're still within the minimum. If you will be allowed to eat more than the minimum bite, in too many cases, people will not separate challah. They won't have the shear. And Rabbi Yossi says no.
How does Rabbi explain
that the Mishnah, you can eat out it. Everyone agrees that if an eating would be called keva, midrabanan, you can't have it, even though it's not tevel, midrabanan. But by dough, by definition, no matter how much you eat, it's always called aray. I'll go more. The other Rishonim say that the way you define formal versus casual is not quantity, but it's how you eat it. No one sits down the way you sit down, they used to eat bread. Bread was the main dish. No one makes dough into a main dish. In other words, dough by default can never be kevad.
Anybody you look at this, no one's saying that when you take that bit of dough, you're actually throwing it into an oven and actually baking it off.
Oh, no. We're talking about eating it.
Consumed as dough.
Yeah. We're talking about consuming as dough. The Mishnah says you can eat aray. So normally you're medaik. Aray, yeah, keva, no. So the Gemara, really, the way we're learning it, everyone says, what dough is never called keva. So the question is, what does that mean? Does it mean that prior to the fully kneading, you can eat as much as you want? Machloikas. Rabbi Chagai says no, because you're not gonna end up separate. There won't be enough left. People ate dough. The machloikas is whether we make a decree and we disallow the eating of a kibetza or whatever would normally be called keva, even though everyone is agreeing that halachically dough can never be eaten keva. Gewaldig. Okay. Says the Gemara. Okay, we're going back to Rab Chagai. Rab Chagai learns the Mishnah the way you normally learn, that you oitlen aray, which means you may not eat keva. V'haida amra da. That's a kasha. Look inside. You have to know these are such strange expressions. V'haida amra da. Look inside the maraful, the 8 lines from the bottom in the beginning of the line. V'haida amra da garsinon, which means v'heichen nemro zois. Where the Rab Chagai wants to back himself up. From where do I say sha'asur liftoir isase min achala? Maybe Dilmamuta. In other words, the Rabbi Chagai is already built on the premise, don't circumvent. And from where do I know that you can't circumvent? From the Mishnah that we learned last week. Remember that Mishnah? In other words, the fact that there is a machloikas tanoim, what do I do if there's a reason to get out of it? Even there's a machloikas. Is a raya that if you don't have a reason of tumah, everyone agrees, don't try to get out of the obligation of separating challah. Again, what did we learn? That's the answer. That's last week's Mishnah. Misha einu yochal lasos isosei b'tahara. Daf chafei omid beis. In other words, the reason why we have 2 opinions, whether you can make small doughs or not, that's lechatchila making small doughs, mipnei she'einu yochal. That's only because if the Mishnah wasn't a case. Remember, you had no water, there's no mikvah, there's no kneader. If the dough that you're making will become tamei, that's a given. You can't get out of that. So the question is, should you make it betuma and have a chala tameya, which implies ha'im ha'ya yachal, if you would be able to make a dough in a state of tara, loy beda. No one would hold that you can make small doughs. That is the ground zero source. Hada amra sha'asur la'adam lasois isasa kabin. Ubemela, and therefore Rab Chagai has a leg to stand on, even though he's moida to the Amoira Rabbi Yossi, that halachically no amount of Isa is called achilas keva, but we still use a shem hamushal. Don't have keva with dough. Why not? Because you're going to eat so much. Again, I really see it that way. People made how much? Even today, 5 pounds is a lot. Well, like I'm thinking about our wives. Do they use the whole peckle? Maybe not always. It's a lot. 5 pounds of flour. So Mastama, they used to use 5.5 pounds. So there was a certain margin that if you lose some flour or if you have a little snack, but if you're going to start eating a lot, you're not going to have the minimum amount. Okay. And now the Gemara continues with the first part of the Mishnah. Again, what is the Gemara Malacha? So the Mishnah says, well, it depends. By wheat, fully kneaded. By barley, flour from barley, it has to be packed down. So says our Gemara, hold on. We began this Masechta that there are 5 grains that are chayiv and challah. The Mishnah only gave you wheat and barley. What about spelt? What about rye? What about oats? That's ushar kol advarim. Does anyone here know the answer? A baker would know. Did anyone here ever make a dough out of spelt? Or rye? I didn't. So say this. So the din is, says the Gemara, at mahalach bohen achar hatimtum. The Gemara uses the same word that the Mishnah uses by barley. So it's like barley. In other words, the only a dough that is a beautiful blend of the flour and the water, that's the metzias. At least according to Chazal, is wheat. It's interesting. None of them get fully blended, and since they don't get fully blended, people don't spend their time trying to do something that you can't achieve. Right? That's one of the definitions of insanity. Trying something, it's not working. Try it again. Try it again. And you think that it's going to work. Why would it work this time? No, you can't knead it. So they kneaded it until where you could, and it's still PC, and they would pack it down. Maybe Kevin can show a video of what that is. I'm sure maybe today with machines. Do people knead it with machines today? No. Yeah. People. So maybe machines do a different type of job. I'm saying whatever. You have to just apply it to the way it's done now. Okay.
I think the way the women do it now is they mix rye with other things. Spelt, they do clean. I know my wife makes spelt all the time for David. Wow. So spelt, she does nothing.
I'm curious. I would be curious. Not that I'm looking. Stam to know the Metzias doesn't bother me if the Metzias doesn't match. I would ask your wife. She should describe the difference. No one does 100. No, but how does the dough feel? Like this packing, like I don't know what it means today.
It definitely feels different.
Feels different.
Yeah, for sure. I've watched it. I felt it. It definitely feels different.
I just eat the dough. That's my part. As if been in the kitchen, the
yeah, well, that's it. I walk through the kitchen.
Fluffy dough after it rose. Yeah. All right, good. Now hold on, guys. We already quoted, I think, 3 times a Chazaka, a Mishnah that we're going to have soon. The Mishnah that speaks about Gereira. What's the din of Gereira? That even though only 5 flours, 5 grains are chayiv and challah, and you have to have a minimum amount. So the Mishnah gives an example of mixing rice flour into wheat flour, that even if the share of 5 pounds of 43.2 eggs, of 5 revoyim is of all of the flour that you have, and all of the flour is not only of wheat. It's a mixture of wheat and rice. So l'chayda, you would say, well, you don't have the minimum of shear from a flour that's chayiv and challah. So we learned the machloikis, but the Mishnah gives us the opinion that subscribes to gereira. The word gereira means to drag along, that the wheat flour drags along the rice flour. In the Mishnah there, as we'll learn, it's not about quantity, it's about taste. So as long as the final product has the tam of wheat, even if there's more rice flour than wheat flour, for the din of challah, the rice is bottled in the wheat. We view all of it as, you get it, flour of wheat, and if you have sum total 5 revoyim, you're chayiv. So you're chayiv to be mafresh challah. Okay. So now, for that it goes together. We learned this chayv and amoitzi, and if you made matzah from it, then you're going to be yoytze the mitzvah of matzah, even though rice flour never comes to chimutz. So making a bread or a matzah, you're not yoytze. Yeah, with the Gemara put it all together. These 3 dinim: chiyuv challah, the bracha, and the yoytze matzah. So now, 1 second. Now let's apply gereira to our topic. What's my topic? What is the gemar melacha of dough? After which, now you mamash have to separate challah. You can't even have a snack. So if you were to make a dough from rice flour, again, rice flour doesn't blend with water the way wheat flour does. So how would you apply the din of gemar melacha? That's the Gemara's kasha now. That also isa menachitim min ha'oides, following the Mishnah, because we already learned last week, I think it was Rab Shimon, then Gamliel in a Braisa argues with the whole Bereida, or some Tana, but the Mishnah subscribes to Bereida, so you're going to say you have to separate challah, but it's not only wheat. In other words, maybe it should be about the mitzias. Does it blend? Does it not blend? Do you pack it? Do you need it? So achar mi at mahalech, is it after giggle or achar timtum? And the way I understand, even though it doesn't blend, but since Benegea, the din of chiyuv challah, the halacha says gereira, we view it as wheat flour. So once halacha gave that rule, so maybe you have to go all the way. maybe you have to say it has to be fully kneaded, even if bepoil people won't do that. That's the kasha. And he doesn't even bother to answer. That he wants you to be aware of the kasha. That's it. Kasha remains unanswered. Okay. And now we're going to learn, like I mentioned, the series of braisas that argue with the Mishnah, which is great. The Mishnah gave the cutoff fully kneaded, right? It's gilgul. By barley, it's called timtum. Hold on. We're going to go from one extreme to the other. More machmir. Some braisas and others are going to be more mekel. So this braisa was taught by Rabbi Hoshaya. That chala means aviv. Dough, from when is it subject to the chala separation? Tevel, I mean, you can't even have arai. So the Mishnah, the braisa says, kimin gavlul. Gavlul means when it becomes clump-like. Now, the Gemara clarifies, was meintos? So Rabbi Lazar, b'shem Rabbi Shaya, it works because Rabbi Shaya was an Amoira. He had the Braisa. So then he taught to his Talmud Rabbi Lazar, it means, the Braisa means, mishetei asa gavlulin, that once the dough became formed into small clumps, which is way before you fully, properly kneaded the dough. I think I know the clumps. I don't know. Kevin doesn't have pictures. You have to just think about kneading dough. It begins by it being clumpy. So in other words, this braisa is being machmid. Once it reached that stage, it's called gemar malacha. You can't even snack. So now, first of all, there's nothing wrong with the braisa arguing with the Mishnah, but the Gemara already knows that. Don't misunderstand it so pashut that there's a machlokes between these two tanoim. The Gemara already understands it on a different level. So Uma Upalig doesn't mean that they argue. So the Gemara says, no, they're not arguing. Our Mishnah is telling you biblical. When is it on a biblical level, Gemar Malachat? The word halacha, sometimes I know halacha means halacha l'moshe misina. We had it not that long ago, that here in the Yerushalmi, halacha means midrabanan. Halacha means always, what do we do? We keep rabbinic law also. So, no, the braisa is telling you la halacha. In other words, the braisa, Tani Rab Hoshaya, is moided to the Mishnah that midoi raisa, what's the gemar malacha from wheat, when it's gilguled, when it's fully kneaded, smooth. The Braisa is saying that midrabanan, even though it only reached the stage of these little clumps, midrabanan, you cannot have achilas arei. Kan halacha. Our Mishnah, this is great, is Devar Torah. I want to say something. It could be that our Mishnah doesn't agree with this midrabanan. It could be. In other words, I don't think the Gemara is trying to say that the Mishnah and the Braisa are mamash on the same page. I think the Gemara is trying to say that this Braisa is not having a machlokes with the Mishnah mitzad din Torah. I think it's having a machlokes with the Mishnah mitzad halacha, mitzad din derabanan. The Rabbeinu HaKadosh didn't subscribe to any rabbinic before it becomes fully smooth. Before the gilgul, you can have achilas arei. And the Braisa holds that midrabanan from this clumpy stage. That is one Braisa. Now we're going to have another Braisa. Says the Gemara Tani in the other direction that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseiro Aimer, that from when is a dough considered gemar melachet? Even after you fully kneaded it, smooth, it's not yet done. Because what happens, Aviv, before you look inside, think about it, you have 5 pounds of flour, huge. Once the dough is dough, you don't have to work with it more. What's the next step that you do? Besides the challah, I'm not talking about the din. Like when you bake bread, what do you need to do? If you don't have to knead the dough, what do you have to do to the dough before you make bread? You let it rise. You smeared it, my mother, with the eggs. Yeah. We had that, putting whatever the drugs in it, the sesame seed. You have to make it into pieces. In other words, you don't put that big clump in the oven. You're gonna have a challah that won't fit in the oven. You separate the dough into balls. That's it. That's what he's saying. It makes sense because gemar malacha. What does gemar malacha means? When there's nothing else to do. When is there nothing else to do? Not when you needed it. Misheteyasa mikrotzes. We just had this word. pieces, large pieces. Mikratzes are the pieces. Now, I want to say something, that this is a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseida and the Mishnah. Guys, the Chachamim could be more machmir. But if you have a Tana that's saying that it's a later stage, we're speaking about Chiyuv Doiraisa. We just established that Rabbeinu HaKadosh is speaking Dvar Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseida Vadai is arguing with the Mishnah. He's saying Dvar Torah, once it's fully needed, it's not Gemar Malachad yet.
Gemar Malacha by him is cutting out the individual sections.
Gemar Malacha is when there's nothing else that you're going to do to this dough other than baking it. Now you can argue, why don't you say the final product is bread? The Gemara is going to ask it because it says Reishis Arisoi Secha. That means challah you remove from Arisoi Secha means your doughs, not from your breads. Even though if you forgot to do it, you do remove it from the breads when you are mitzad of it. But Gemar Malacha, that's what Gemar Malacha means. Remember all of these Mishnayos that we learned. When you pack the item, it's in a basket and it's covered. Then it's called tevel because there's nothing else to do to it.
This could still fit Klum's opinion because he said that that's just rabbinic.
100%. In other words, the Braisa will understand that our Mishnah and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseida, they have a machlokes Dvar Torah, whichever side you pick, and then the Braisa says, which is very nice, midrabanan, they were machmer, they gave you an earlier stage. But again, we should look at this. So it says the Gemara, my time the Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseida, it says on Pasha Shalach, kitrumas goyren, just like you separate trumas umaisras from the threshing floor. What's the pshat threshing floor? The meruach. There's nothing else. We're speaking about people that sell it. It's ready to be sold. And don't forget, if you're taking it home, the threshing floor is also not the end. It's Riyas Pnei Bayis. So it's consistent. Kein Torimo Oisa. So ma trumas goyren nitelas min hagomor, just like the bona fide biblical definition of tevel is only when the produce is completed. Completed means there's no more work that you are going to do to make it more completed. It's completed. Geendigt. Avzu nitelas min hagomer. So now the Gemara says, well, you know what gomer is? Gomer is loaves. Gomer is baked. So frek the Gemara ma'ata, why don't you say Yehuda ben Beseida that the chiyuv of chal is only lichesh eteyafa? So that's not true. So Amar Rav Matanya or Rav Masniya that lo yihukshul trumas hagoyden ela lemeleches ho'erus. Hold on, we're speaking about dough making. Reishis adisoi sechem. The dough is completed once it's already in its smaller forms or pieces. You don't have to put it in a form. Many people would smear it on the oven. It's not about a form. It's when there's nothing more that you are going to do with the dough other than to put it into the oven. But you're not going to go ahead and say that that you take challah from baked bread because you're going against what it says. Reishis arisoi seichem.
Forgot to. Now you make the bread. Don't we say you could?
So of course we could. That's what we said. Eloma, you have to have the minimum share. And just to go back what we learned, because there is a machlokes based on our Gemara. One thing is for sure, that you have to gather all of the bread from which challah was not removed into a basket. Or if you have flatware, then you have to cover it with a towel. Something that halachically is going to combine it. The big question will be, am I allowed to do it if the breads were in different ovens? We had this last week or 2 weeks ago. In other words, what happens if a person had various ovens and they forgot to remove challah from everything that they made? And could you combine a bread from oven aleph and from oven beis and say, now that I have in this keli the 43.2 eggs, the amount of bread that came from 5 pounds of flour, and now that's a big question. Some Rishonim hold that only if they were baked in the same oven. When they bake matzah today, that's what they do. And they do that lifnai v'lifnim mishuras hadin. Don't remember, guys, that halachically, when you are moving dough, I don't care for how long, it never will halachically become chametz, even if physically it's rising. When we had the doughs on our backs when we left Mitzrayim, if we would have been in movement the whole time, then halachically it never would have turned into chametz. The reason why we say and it no longer would ever become, that's even when we stopped, even when you leave it to rest. So really, when they go in a matzah bakery today and they mix the flour in the water, the 18 minutes is 18 minutes resting. And it used to be that way. That's the whole thing of gebrachts, that from the times of the Magid, or not that long ago, they started to say, let's be machmer. Let's count the 18 minutes, not when it's resting. No one would leave it to rest. When do you leave it to rest? Mamash for a few minutes when you put it on the stick and you put the stick near the oven, whoever saw that. So until when they put it and they put the whatever, it's resting for a minute or two, not 18 minutes. They said they want the whole thing to be within 18 minutes. So therefore they want to minimize the time. So one of the things that they don't do is they don't remove challah. How long does it take to remove challah? I don't know, 30 seconds? That's how careful people are not to have 18 minutes total. But if they don't remove challah, how do you eat the matzah? So that's the way they do it today. They put it in the oven. When they remove the matzah from the oven, in the same oven, they put it in a keli or they cover it. I see it the whole time. And they make a bracha, lahafresh challah. I want you to know, so when we have time, just to say one more thing. There's a machlokes, I think, between the Machaber and the Ramah. I have to check. What's the nusach of the bracha? Right? What do you Svardim do? Lahafresh truma. I think the Machaber says you say lahafresh truma because the Torah calls it kein turimu gamatem. The Torah uses the word truma. The Ramah says, or to say lahafresh challah. And it's time to know that minig Yisrael, where do we use the word challah? To the whole dough. It would make more sense. It would fit more like the Sfardim. I think what I'm saying is correct, and if not, then nishkeferlich.
They don't say hamotzi the rest of the year, so they still have to take challah.
What was that?
The Sephardim police say hamotzi and matzah.
That's a separate parsha. No, that's a separate parsha. Any product that was made from the 5 grains here in LA rabbinically has to have challah removed, even though there's no minimum amount, which is fine. The question is, this is a question like, what bracha do you make? I only know what I know from Lafresh Challah Truma. This, I see. I want to look inside the big Shulchan Aruch, find out in which simon. If I'm not mistaken, the Machaber says, Lisei Lahafresh Truma. And why? Because we use the word challah to the whole bread. Even though the Torah uses the word challah, the Torah calls the separated part challah. But they say Loshen Kra Luchud, Loshen Chazal Luchud, Loshen the people Luchud. Since we call it bread challah, I'm just saying, I heard this many years ago, so it makes sense not to confuse people. The separation, you can't say challah, what you are eating is the challah. And the Ramah says, no, follow the words of the pasuk. Even though we call challah the bread, we call the bread the challah, the Torah calls the separated part challah. And final, just on that, we have another minute, is that we had in our Gemara the shocking thing that the word challah, what's the shoydish of the word challah? Chulin. This is a crazy thing. That would be another reason why we should not call the challah challah. In other words, truma means harama, v'hafrasha, elevated. Challah means chulin. But yet, by Ashkenazim for sure, the bracha is lahafresh challah. Huh? We don't say mino isa. No, we just say lahafresh challah. I don't think so. I think it's Denmark. I want to take a big Shulchan Aruch. I'll look at it. If you don't have it now, you can find out from Google which simin. It's in Yored Day. I think it's a machlekes. Rabbi Tauber said good that all of these restaurants are not subscribing to the Sephardic rules anyway. They might as well go all the way Ashkenazic when it comes to Bishul. Just to know that people that subscribe to the definition of Bishul Yisrael versus Bishul Akum should not eat in